Well, hello, and thanks for coming to listen. It's a pleasure to be able to share with you some of my perspectives about the nature of shamanism and related magical religious practitioners. So what I want to tell you about today begins with what I did for my dissertation research, which ended up being published as Shamans, Priests, and Witches, and try to tack on to that some of the things that I did basically across the rest of my career, which at one point has been summarized in this book, Shamanism, a biopsychosocial paradigm of consciousness and healing. Most of the ideas that I'm going to present to you today are available on researchgate.net. Just put my name in there and go to research, and the book's not there. Shamans, Priests, and Witches is, and a whole lot of other stuff that might give you an idea of what are some of the details behind the broad strokes of shamanism and its neurological basis that I want to present for you today. I'm also going to give you a little bit of an update to that earlier research, a recent article of mine in the Journal of Archaeological Method and Theory, where I present some updated quantitative research about the societal predictors of shamans and other kinds of magical religious healers. So most of what I have to say today is embedded in this article here. If you want to go find it on ResearchGate, or go directly to the journal there at the DOI. So what I want to do with this talk is start off with some general concerns about what is the nature of shamanism and how does this relate to other kinds of magical religious practitioners. And I'm going to present some very simple understandings and then the problematic, which is shamanism real? Does it exist in societies around the world, or is this just a Western invention, a hippie idea? And I'm going to propose that cross-cultural research methods is fundamental for getting a scientific understanding of this question. And basically the question I posed was, is shamanism a cross-cultural phenomena? I'm going to present to you the evidence I found, and specifically what it is that I would call shamans or foraging shamans are different from other kinds of shamanistic healers who share similarities with shamans and using altered states of consciousness, but have a lot of other differences. And I'm going to show how these differences correspond to a general social evolution of magical religious practitioners. That what was originally the only kind of religious practitioner, a shaman in a foraging society, eventually evolves into and is supplemented by a variety of other kinds of religious practitioners, including priests and witches and healers and mediums. So I'm going to sort of give you an idea of how this development happened in terms of general sociocultural evolution. Most of what I want to talk about today is about this category of shamanistic healers, which is broader than just the shamans, because they share a common biogenetic basis. And these biogenetic bases, or the biogenetic dynamics of shamanistic healing, involve the roles of ritual in primate society, ape society, hominid society, and hominin ancestors. Has to do with how healing is intrinsic to ritual processes. It will address the nature of altered states of consciousness and how they reflect certain aspects of our brain dynamics and brain functions. And finally, I'm going to present the idea that ritual and altered states of consciousness stimulate our innate modular structures, our innate intelligences, or innate operators, innate forms of cognitive processing that are manifested under the conditions of altered states, and which is one of the foundational aspects of why we have shamans and hunter-gatherer societies around the world with remarkably similar properties, and shamanistic healing, the use of altered states in rituals for healing that persist even in today, although the practitioners that we find today are not what I would call shaman, even though most people would say, well, that looks like shamanism to me. Well, I want to tell you, it's not foraging shamanism, and I'm going to give you a clear understanding of what that is. But what is a shaman? I mean, the way the word's used today can apply to just about anybody, devil worshippers to medicine men, psychotics, fraud, your grandmother, the crazy guy down on the corner. I mean, what is a shaman? The word has become so popular, and so many people have engaged some general notion of shaman as someone who uses altered states to heal, that it's applied to everything, it seems, today. And that leaves the question of, what is a shaman unanswered? Are all of these different things a shaman? If so, the word's not very meaningful anymore. Or is it none of these? is shamanism really something very different from the popular conceptions if we look at the cross-cultural patterns? So Eliade really set us on this course of a cross-cultural view of the shaman. He did a very loose comparative study of traditional healing practices, not only throughout Siberia, Paleo-Asia, but around the world, to point to what he thought was a cross-cultural pattern. The shaman being someone who enters ecstasy to communicate with spirits on behalf of the community. Eliade talked about the all-night communal ceremony where everybody showed up and everybody participated in singing and drumming sometimes and dancing. The shaman, known for his extensive bouts of drumming and dancing for hours and hours, and then collapsing, reclining into a visionary experience, the soul flight, to go to the different levels of the world, to travel the axis mundi, and to use the information acquired there for healing and for divination. And key to the shaman's work was a relationship with animals, the animal allies that served as the vehicles through which the shaman engaged in things such as soul recovery and the removal of spirits. So Eliade thought that this pattern was found in societies around the world. Of course, there are many people that have questioned Eliade, suggesting that the pattern is not so clear and distinct, and some people denying it altogether, saying that shamans is just something that happens in certain Altaic societies of Eastern Siberia. So the problematic here is the question of, are the same characteristics found cross-culturally? Or is this just in some Siberian societies? This really was the point of departure for my research, addressing the question of whether or not shamanism was just a Western invention, or whether it really is a transcendent reality, something that exists independently of people's construals and constructions of it. The question here is shamanism an etic phenomena, something that is real and found in different cultures? For instance, we know that there are things such as a foraging lifestyle. Cultures that have foraging as their food production have a whole wide variety of other kinds of features that are part of a foraging lifestyle. We can reliably talk about what they are, even though there are some variations. Family farms. Is there a nuclear family everywhere? No, but there are nuclear families in many different cultures, and they can be easily distinguished, just as can patrilineal extended families or matrilocal family farms. These are concepts that are not universal, but have cross-cultural applicability. Similarly, as in kinship systems, where Omaha and Crow and Eskimo systems are found in cultures around the world. So my question was, is shamanism really something that can be found in different cultures in fundamentally the same form? And my response to how to scientifically resolve this question was to do cross-cultural research. So that cross-cultural research, that was my dissertation, it's eventually published as Shaman, Priests, and Witches, is the core of the first part of what I want to tell you about today. This book here is now out of print. I've made it available on ResearchGate, so you can go there and download the whole thing and get a lot of the details I'm just not going to have time to cover today. So what this research was about was using a standard cross-cultural subsample, and identifying within these sample societies the different types of religious practitioners, not just shamans or healers or priests, everything, anything that constituted a magical religious practitioner, I coded. 115 practitioners in 47 societies, 3 shamans, priests, and witches for the details. What I coded on were the features that were reported in ethnographies, and I underwent reiterative processes of developing a questionnaire that would reflect what was reported, and that wasn't everything that I really would like to know about. What I ended up coding were things like, what did the people do? Healing, divination, ancestor worship, agricultural rituals, malevolent acts. What were the social and political powers of the practitioners? Did they have taxation authority? Did they have judiciary authority? Did they engage in warfare? What were their social characteristics? Males, females, both, mostly males, economic status, and their morality. Were they basically people who only did good, people who only did bad, are people who might do good sometimes and bad other times. What were their professional groups like? What kind of specializations did they have? How were they selected for those groups? How were they trained? And looking at things like, did they become a practitioner because they got ill, or because someone said, yeah, you're a witch, or was it because, my dad was the head priest, so I get to be the head priest. So looking at different forms of selection, how they were trained, and where they did their rituals. Was this a public ritual? Was it a private ritual? Did they do it for clients? And, where did they do it? Did they do it in a public space? Did they do it in secrecy? Or was the whole community involved, the whole community, or just a family? Where'd they get their power? They get it from spirits, from animal spirits, from the gods, from mana, from ritual knowledge, from spells, and then, what kind of special abilities they had, what kind of techniques they used, and how they altered consciousness. Did they have soul flight? Did they have possession, death, and rebirth? How did they get into these altered states? Was it fasting or abstinence? Did they use drumming or singing or chanting or sleep deprivation or drugs? And what were the characteristics of their altered states? Did they have seizures, convulsions? So all this went into basically a kind of a checklist that left me with more than 100 variables. When I did my original research, I reduced it to 98 variables from a much larger number. But what I also have done since then is recoded the data, and now we got 236 variables. I'll tell you about them more later. But there's a data set out there that hasn't been analyzed yet. And it was because I finished my dissertation. I got a National Science Foundation dissertation improvement grant. I recoded the data and never went back to analyze it. But what I got out of the initial analyses, I'm going to tell you today. Cluster analyses gave me the different types of magical religious practitioners. So I took all these characteristics, used a mathematical formula to measure their similarity, put it in a cluster analysis, which gives me groups based upon common characteristics. And then I took those groups, looked at what they were like, what their characteristics were, and I assigned them names. So there was one group that was clumped together in different ways. I call these shamans, shaman healers, and healers a healer complex. The shaman healers sometimes are clustered with the shamans and sometimes with the healers, depending on the specific cluster analysis program. And for reasons I'll explain later, the healer complex and the medium, which was a distinctly different group, I group as shamanistic healers. They share features of the shaman group I'll tell you about in a minute. Two other groups, which I will touch on just very briefly here, the priest and the sorcerer witches. Two other kinds of magical religious practitioners. But what I want to tell you about today are the shamanistic healers and why they are a universal of human culture. All societies have some form of shamanistic healer. The descriptions of these shamanistic healers are in this article in Religion, Brain, and Behavior. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at those features. I'll give you a really simple breakdown and comparison, however, a few slides later. First, how do these practitioners relate to one another? There was 47 societies, 115 practitioners, so some societies had more than one practitioner. If it had what I call the shaman, it was in societies alone, no other kinds of practitioners. So exclusion relationships with healers, mediums, shaman, healers, sorcerer, witches, and priests. If you got a shaman, you don't have anything else. On the other hand, if there was a healer present, a priest was present. If a medium was present, a priest was present. Shaman, healer present, priest present. Sorcerer, witch present, a priest is present. What that really tells us, though, is the opposite kind of causal implication. A priest is responsible for the emergence of these features of healers, mediums, shaman healers, and sorcerer witches. And this gives us specific kinds of underlying dynamics of these magical religious practitioners that I want to tell you about briefly here. I looked at the relationship between how the practitioners were selected and what their principal functions were. And it gave me three major entailment chains that I've laid out here. If they were selected through visions or dreams or spirit visitations or vision quests, they had ritual alterations of consciousness and did healing and divination. These are the shamanistic healers, shamans, shaman healers, healers, and mediums. If their selection involved succession, father to son or similar, or political action, then they held political and legislative power, and they did agricultural rituals and rituals for protection and worship. These were the priests. And if they were selected based on social labeling, attribution of some kind of inheritance, it's because their parents were like that, then normally these were people that were considered to only do malevolent activities, and they didn't have political power at all. They just did evil stuff. And these were the sorcerer witches. So the different groups directly correspond to different dynamics for selection and functions of magical religious practitioners. So I propose a general model here that I'll articulate at least partially later on. The shamanistic healers have a biogenetic base and ritual alterations of consciousness which contribute to healing. And this is a universal. All cultures have this aspect of magical religious practice. Some societies also have priests that represent what we conventionally consider to be religion. And I will argue that they have their origins in adaptations for following ancestors, that these got institutionalized as priests. And the priests are engaged in agriculture and worship and propitiation and other activities that help unite a society around a set of beliefs and high gods normally. And then the sorcerer witch, I think, is a dynamic of prosecution and killing oppressed people in society. It's a way of saying you're immoral and we've got the moral authority to get rid of you because you do horrible things like cause illness and death to other people. So these different dynamics I've just laid out, the different configurations of the practitioners, the different types of practitioners, their different selection and entailment functions are now added with some basic information about what kinds of societies do these occur in. And this was, once again, the findings from my dissertation back in '85. If you got one type of practitioner in society, only one, it's almost always a shaman or shaman healer, and they're in foraging societies. If you get two types, then you get a healer complex, one kind of shamanistic healer, and a priest. You get three types, you got the priest, the shamanistic healer, and a medium or the sorcerer witch. And then if you have four types in society, priest, sorcerer witch, medium, and healer. And these range from foraging societies to intensive agriculture to hierarchical political integration to the presence of social classes. So this general dynamic corresponds to an overall model of sociocultural evolution. That model I updated a bit here in this recent publication. I used an online data set for the standard cross-cultural sample, where Doug White placed the practitioners, the shamans, shaman healers, mediums, priests, and sorcerer witches, and used the whole standard cross-cultural database to try to see what the predictors were. And so what we get as the predictors of the shamanistic healers is that shamans are found in foraging societies that don't have external warfare or intensive agriculture. And shaman healers, the practitioners that they're most similar to, are found in intensive agricultural societies with little reliance on foraging and also without any political integration. The healer, however, is in societies with political integration, with war, and with a weak jurisdictional system, probably because the healer is a key part of this, as well as the priest. And then the mediums, societies with political integration, as well as with war. Plunder and captives was the type of warfare. I'm not going to be able to explain why this is important for understanding mediums here, but see the article in Religion, Brain, and Behavior. So what the cross-cultural research gave me first was groups of practitioners based upon the empirical variables that I coded. Then I turned around and I take the variables that were used to form the groups through cluster analysis, and I find which ones are associated with each type. So these are the empirical characteristics of shamans. When I say shamans here, I could also be a little more specific and say foraging shamans. They're the shamans that were found in the foraging societies. Remember back here? And then I'm going to talk about shaman healers. We can also talk about these as agricultural shamans. They're the ones that were found in societies with agriculture. Foraging shamans have nighttime overnight displays. Normally the shamanic ceremony got started after darkness and often ran till the next morning. Stayed up all night partying, chanting and drumming and dancing, the shaman doing all of these. Normally the community also chanting and clapping and singing, sometimes drumming. The shaman, after a while, goes into a visionary experience, an altered state of consciousness, characterized by soul flight. The identity of the person leaves and travels to other worlds. Sometimes in the transformed identity of an animal. The shaman becomes an eagle or becomes some other kind of bird or becomes even a wolf or an anaconda and goes and does something, experiences the world in the body of an animal. The developmental cycle of the shaman involves a period of death and rebirth. And it's an experience that's typified by the notion that the shaman gets torn apart by the animals and then gets put together back again by the animals who incorporate in the shaman to give the shaman powers. So a key aspect of the shaman's work besides healing and divination, left off here, is hunting magic. They engage in certain activities related to facilitating the hunt, and it appears that also afterwards they engage in various activities to honor the animals that were killed as food. One thing that is very clear about the shaman is that the shaman is a feared individual because the shaman has the capacity to kill other people. Malevolent magical acts, sending out darts, robbing souls. So this is something that was associated with shamans in foraging societies. People today say, oh, I'm a shaman. And I go, oh, really? How many people have you killed? Oh, no, I don't kill people. I'm a shaman. Well, foraging shamans have the capacity in their belief system to kill people. The shaman healer or agricultural shaman, most of the core characteristics of shamans, but they're found in sedentary agricultural societies. They're subordinated socially to the priest. They participate with priests in doing the agricultural rituals, the annual cycle of rituals that are part of how it is that the group comes to understand the processes of planting and harvesting. They're trained by a group. The group controls who gets to be a shaman healer. They have a hierarchy within the society in terms of who was the lead healer. And they're formally recognized in their role with a ceremony. Normally, the shaman healers have specialized roles. They don't do everything. One just does diagnosis. You go to another one to get healed. You know, one does agricultural rituals, but another just heals a certain kind of illness. And they have an impersonal power. It's not just controlling animals, but they have something like mana. And their healing treatments tend to be domestic. They go to the family of the patient. And in this sense, they have a very different dynamic than the communal healing ceremonies of shamans. And included in this shaman healer were traditions that would be considered meditative traditions of Buddhism, mystical traditions of Islam, stuff like this, that are indications that shamans continue in a different form in more complex societies and begin to lose some of the core characteristics. Another aspect of the shaman healer, shamanistic healer dynamic is the healer. And they engage in agricultural rituals. They do animal sacrifices. They have powerful professional groups that have economic and political power in society. They don't really do much in terms of altered states of consciousness, and they don't have direct relationships with the spirits. They have relationships with high gods. They engage in worship. They ask gods to help out, but they don't try to control spirits. And when they do divination, it's like throwing lots, like the winnowing baskets that are used in many societies in Africa. Things like, the I Ching, a tarot, where you have a material system that's manipulated and interpreted. And their healings involve special spells they learn, incantations, formulas, and they focus on exorcism. And their healing practices are typically private client rituals. They may also engage in public rituals, helping priests in the context of agricultural rituals. Mediums. These are often called shamans, but they weren't even grouped with the healer complex. They're a separate group off by themselves. They don't have many characteristics associated with shamans other than they do alter states, but they're possession alter states, not the soul flight. So they're found in complex societies with warfare for captives. Mediums tend to become mediums later in life, early adulthood, or even later. Predominantly women, lower class, and their initial involvement is a kind of possession by spirits that take them over. And normally it's a superior spirit, a high god, male gods, powerful male figures that take over these lower class women and turn them into powerful figures on their own. Their alter states are not only characterized by possession, but they manifest specific physical characteristics: tremors, convulsions, seizures, various forms of compulsive motor behavior, shaking, trembling, repetitive actions, amnesia, and dissociation. Very different from the typical profile of the shaman. And they heal by exorcism, taking out unwanted spirits. That basically, becoming a medium means you're diagnosed as being possessed by a spirit, and in the process of being healed, you're formed as a medium who knows how to control the spirits to a certain degree, help protect people from spirits, protect them from malevolent magical practitioners and witches. Another kind of practitioner was the sorcerer witch. They're accused of doing malevolent acts. They normally say, no, not me, but they're thought to cause illness, death. They're so horrible, they're thought to kill their own kin, to engage in wanton economic destruction of crops, of domestic animals, and they're thought to engage in cannibalism, eating the body or the soul of their victims. And they're thought to be really horrible people morally that are motivated by revenge and jealousy and anger, or the desire to get things that other people have that they don't have. This position is basically something that you say, no, it's not me, because they're likely to be killed if you're successfully accused of being a sorcerer witch. And this is not gender or sex preferential. Both males and females may be sorcerers or witches. Some societies it's mostly one or the other, but in most cases, both males and females can be considered. And the witches are found in societies with priests and healers, who normally are the people that are accusing someone of being a sorcerer or witch and carrying out the prosecution. But the sorcerer witch does not occur in societies with shamans. So sorcerer witch occurs in societies that have a judiciary but low community integration and high levels of political integration. So what we note is that the sorcerer witch is at the lower level of a hierarchical political system, that the people from the top, the priests and the healers, are determining who's a sorcerer witch and what we're going to do about it. I contend that the sorcerer witch has an origin in shamanism. And I'm not going to give you the whole argument here, but you can read it in Shamans, Priests, and Witches. They have commonalities. They do rituals at night. They get powers from spirits, especially animal spirits. They engage in things that we would call contagious magic, sympathetic magic. They are thought to steal and devour the souls, particularly of children. They can shoot magical darts. Their power may fly out of control and harm someone. They're thought to be able to transform into an animal, become a wolf or some other animal, and also to fly through that transformative experience. And they don't occur in the same society. You have a shaman or you have a sorcerer witch, not both. And the difference is the level of political integration. Shamans in societies without political integration and warfare, sorcerer witches in societies with political integration and warfare. So how do we explain the universals of shamanism? I'm going to take an initial approach here in terms of looking at these major aspects of the shamanic complex. Why do we have nighttime, overnight community rituals? Everybody's expected to be there. Everybody in the group comes together. They're doing chanting, drumming, and dancing together, and they're doing healing, particularly of soul loss, problems caused by sorcery. The alterations of consciousness. Why the death and dismemberment? Why is this such a repeated motif? And the visionary experiences, the entry into the spirit world, the soul flight, the separation of the experiential body from the physical body, and often in the form of transforming into an animal. And finally, the animal associations of shamanism. Shamans are thought to get their power from animals, to control animals, to have an animal spirit identity, and to engage in hunting magic. The last here is in part, I think, due to the ecological circumstances. They're foraging societies. Animals are the most important actors out there. But these other ones, I think we can explain in neurological terms. So, the cross-cultural patterns attest to something about the biogenetic bases of these practices. My presentation today is going to elaborate on what I would say is an ape-hominid communal ritual integration. Our chimpanzee cousins have nighttime community integration ceremonies. These are for reuniting the group and providing protection. And there are many similarities that I'll elaborate with shamanic practices. These are kinds of conspicuous displays done by the alpha male that exhibit excessive fitness of drumming and hooting and shouting and drumming on tree trunks for hours. I think this is the biogenetic origin of shamanism in what we can see in other hominid species. These ritual dynamics evoke endogenous healing processes. I think the most important aspects of shamanic healing have to do with placing the individual in a set of circumstances in which our own healing responses are elicited or initiated. Those related to opioid-mediated bonding, as well as placebo and hypnotic effects and psychoneuroimmunological effects. Just touch a little bit upon this, but I think that we can see that these have deep roots in hominid evolution, and particularly the role of singing in eliciting opioids and social bonding and stimulating other neurotransmitter systems, and the emergence of placebo and hypnotic effects related to dissociation, which also place a person in a kind of submissive state that allows a variety of healing dynamics to occur because of the presence of powerful others, the shaman. I'm going to propose that one of the cross-cultural biogenetic bases of shamanism involves innate processes related to ASCs, altered states of consciousness. And that what altered states of consciousness basically involve is the integration of the reptilian and paleomammalian brain functions, an integration of our innate intelligences. And these innate intelligences are one of the reasons why we get certain kinds of information available to us in these shamanic states. These intelligences have to do with the integration of cognitive modules. These cognitive modules are part of our own evolved capacities. These evolved capacities are part of how humans became smarter. We didn't just get more overall computing capacity. We also got a variety of specialized intelligences that enable us to see the world in certain ways and act upon the world in certain ways, exemplified in language, in singing, the mimetic suite, the ability to communicate through imitation, as well as other intelligences related to animals, understanding others, etc. So I'm going to propose that all of these kinds of activities were part of how it was that shamanism emerged cross-culturally as a kind of group or communal dynamic of adaptation to integrate the community, to elicit intrinsic healing processes, and to integrate our cognitive and emotional dynamics. So, phylogenetic origins of shamanism are indicated by the similarities between shamanic ritual and the major displays of apes. So this indicates that part of the hominid baseline was the community nighttime reunification ritual, because every night the chimpanzees reunify a dispersed group that goes into a splinter mode during the day, fissioning. They refuse tonight at night through a communal ritual that involves the alpha male engaging in an expensive display of energy, drumming and hollering and jumping around and making a lot of noise at a particular tree that brings all the dispersed members of the group together. And they join in the tree after submitting to the alpha male and engage in group emotional vocalizations and drumming on the tree buttresses and the tree trunks and even beating on them with branches sometimes. So this has a function of providing protection from the group, integrating a dispersed group that engages in foraging during the day and bring them all together at nighttime. And this is basically led by the alpha male, who engages in a bipedal display that involves precursors of dancing and mimesis, and also involves this kind of drumming